Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. And welcome back, everybody. When we come across somebody who has spent a lot of time helping others, giving above and beyond of themselves, we make them our Centurion recipient. We found somebody today that has done that for many years, practicing law, specifically in U.S. constitutional law and, of course, criminal. Alan Dershowitz joins us here on the program today. Hey, Alan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. As you suggest, I've done half of my cases over my 60-year career pro bono without fee for poor people and for people who couldn't otherwise get lawyers. So I hope I've satisfied the criteria for helping others. You know, the great Rabbi Hillel once said, if we are not for ourselves, who will be for us? But if we are for ourselves alone, what are we? And so I've tried to balance defending my people and myself and defending others.
When we talk about constitutional law, that term a lot of us here maybe not so familiar with it. Can you define it?
Sure. The Constitution has two aspects. The body of the Constitution itself, which is mostly structural, separation of powers, Congress, the president, but it has very few rights in it. And then there's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And when I practice constitutional law, I generally focus on the First Amendment, sometimes the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, the Fifth Amendment, the privilege against self-incrimination, the Sixth Amendment, the right to defend yourself, and other parts of the Bill of Rights. And that's what the practice of constitutional law entails, defending people's rights based on the text of the Constitution and its interpretation by the Supreme Court.
You run deep. We didn't even get a moment to explain everything you've done. I don't even think we have enough time in your career. More than 1,000 articles in magazines, newspapers, journals, blogs, including the New York Times Magazine, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and on. Alan, what did it for you? What bit you when it comes to law? What grabbed you?
Well, I grew up in the shadow of the Holocaust, and members of my family were murdered during the Holocaust. And I always understood that without the rule of law, we can't really be expected to have liberty. You know, it was Justice Scalia, who was a friend of mine, who once said, if we want to be the land of the free, we have to be the home of the brave. And we have to be brave and show courage. And I've tried to show courage through my career. It's resulted in a lot of unpopularity among some people. You know, when I defended Donald Trump against an unconstitutional impeachment, I lost all of my friends on Martha's Vineyard, and some of my family members wouldn't talk to me because I was on the wrong side of politics. But I didn't do it for politics. I did it for the Constitution.
What is the driving force that makes you hold on to these principles? What is it? Is it just your upbringing?
It's partly my upbringing. I was brought up by very principled parents, poor. I was the first person in my family to go to college. But they always demanded that I defend the underdog and do justice. And you know, I've lived a long life. I'm 86 years old. And I've seen injustice from the right, injustice from the left. And I've decided to be non-political in defense of justice. And that makes me enemies on both sides because each side thinks I should be defending their side, but not the other side. Free speech for me, but not for thee. That's not the American way.
We have similar viewpoints because when it comes to politics, I try not to engage. I'm a believer in what is right and the greater good for all. Let's go back to your childhood. At one point did you realize, hey, I want to get into law?
I think from the day I learned how to speak, I was always argumentative. I was always getting into trouble. I was always having to defend myself, defending others. I remember my mother had to come to school to defend me and everybody from the time I was, 7 or 8 years old. Said, this kid's going to be a lawyer. This kid's going to be a lawyer. And so I became a lawyer. I never thought I had an alternative. And I wanted to be on the side of justice. I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. I wanted to defend underdogs, people who were prosecuted by the state. I wanted to defend unpopular free speech. So, you know, I've been doing it for I would say, almost 70 years now.
Unbelievable. And I have to be honest with you, 86, you sound sharper than most people in their 40s. It's amazing.
Well, I try to stay sharp. I try to write every day. I try to argue every day. I try to walk every day. And so I try to keep in shape. But I've been very lucky that I've been given blessings of good health. I know friends of mine who are my age who are as smarter than I was younger, and they've begun to lose it in their 80s, and that will probably happen to me if I live long enough. But right now, I feel like I'm on top of my game.
When you look back to those 70-something years of a legal career, there's got to be a case or two, maybe more, that stand out that you're particularly proud of. If we keep it confidential, would love to hear just the principles of the case if there's one there.
Sure. I represented a man named Anatoly Sharansky. He was a dissident in the Soviet Union, and he was thrown in jail for his political views. And he was a refusenik. He wanted to move to Israel and be with his people, and they refused to let him, and he went to jail. And I identified very strongly with him, and I fought his case for 8 years. I went to the Soviet Union. I argued in front of Soviet judges and Soviet authorities, and ultimately we got him free. And when he got out, he met me and hugged me and gave me a Hebrew blessing, Baruch Matir Asurim, blessed are those who free thee in prison. He then became a minister in Israel, and he's a very prominent human rights activist now, defending human rights. And I guess it's the case I'm most proud of, because we couldn't win it just on the law. It was the Soviet Union. We had to use politics, economics, diplomacy. I traveled all over the world defending him, and we've become good friends. So
Wow.
That's probably the case I'm most proud of in my life. I've represented a lot of people who people hate: O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Klaus von Bülow, Leona Helmsley, Donald Trump, Jeffrey Epstein. But the job of the criminal lawyer is not to pick and choose who you defend, but to defend anybody whose constitutional rights are violated, without regard to what it will bring you in terms of popularity or unpopularity.
When it comes to the one of those cases, you mentioned them. I'm going to.
Yeah.
I don't want to focus on them, but just in terms of mentioning the O.J. case.
Yeah.
What do you want people to know? I mean, we're talking decades later here, but what would you say about that case that stands out for you?
Well, the police believed he was guilty, and they had a basis for that, and they planted evidence against him. They cheated. They took a sock that was found near his bed, and they poured the blood of O.J. Simpson and one of his victims on the sock. And we were able to prove that scientifically by blood splatter evidence, by DNA evidence, and many of the jurors came away saying, this guy probably did it, but we're not going to convict him based on evidence that was tampered with by the government. And so they found him not guilty. They didn't say he was innocent, but they found him not guilty.
Even back then, were you pretty amazed about the scientific process which was enabled, the blood spattering patterns and all of that? Even that, back in the day, that was able to be done that way?
Well, I started teaching that back in the 1960s, and I started to tell my students the future of law is science. And you have to learn DNA, you have to learn blood splatter, you have to learn to be a better scientist than anybody on the other side. And so the law was dependent on science, and I won the case through the use of science. And so it's something I've specialized in over the years, law and science. Yeah.
You've had more than 1 million books sold. You've written quite a few of them. Fiction
55 books.
Thank you for that, because I didn't have that here. And I'm pretty well prepared, but I didn't have that here. What book needs to be written next?
Oh, I think a book that needs to be written is how the Constitution applies to everybody. It can't be used in a partisan manner to just help certain people and not other people. And we have to persuade Americans that the Constitution is not written for one party or another, for one ethnic group or another, for one race or another. It's written for everybody, and it has to strike an appropriate balance, and that has to be written, and I try to write it every day in my...
It's interesting. I ran into somebody recently, had some long conversations with them about Thomas Jefferson, and it's all about the truth. He gravitated to everything's connected to the truth. The truth needs to go into everything we do on a daily basis. Doesn't matter if you're an architect. Doesn't matter if you're a landscaper. There's truth in everything we do.
And he wrote that to his nephew, Peter Carr, when he was a young boy, how important the truth is. I was able to acquire, I'm very lucky, a letter written by Thomas Jefferson in his hand, a handwritten letter with a spelling mistake in it.
Wow.
Written on the 25th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, defending free speech, and I have it hanging on my wall, and I look at it every day. And it's an inspiration for me how 224 years ago, the then President of the United States could be defending the free speech of those who were opposed to him and who were attacking him. And Jefferson was a great man, a flawed man, like all men and all women are, but a great man.
Let's take a look at somebody looking to get into the legal profession. What advice would you have for them?
Well, learn science. Learn things beyond the law. The law yourself you'll be able to pick up in law school, but become very well-rounded and become somebody who can deal in economics, who can deal in science, who can deal in a range of other issues, and that will make you a much better lawyer.
As you look back to your legal career, even when you were in school, is there something that you wish you studied back then?
Well, I had a very broad education. I went to yeshiva. I studied the Bible, and the Bible is an important tool for law, too. I wish I were better at mathematics. I think that's important as well. But, I got a good grounding in science, a good grounding in literature. I was very, very fortunate. Again, I came from a poor family. We couldn't afford to go to a paying college. So I went to a New York City college that was free, Brooklyn College, and I got an education comparable to a Harvard education for free. And it was a very broad-based liberal arts education. So I would recommend that for anybody who's studying law. Do not take pre-law. That's the worst thing you can do, is take pre-law classes. You'll get that in law school. Take classes outside of law, so when you come to law school, you're broad-based.
Interesting. Appreciate that advice. Wow. Psychology. A lot of that's involved in what you do. I find it interesting that you married a psychologist.
Yeah. I'm so lucky. She keeps me straight. And, she is broadly based, too. She has her PhD in neuropsychology, the psychology of the brain. But then she became a clinical psychologist, and then she became a child psychologist. So she's had a broad base of practice, and she practices on me every day.
Whether you know it or not.
No.
It's interesting. Neuropsychology, much more popular now, even just the principles contained within, like more just people that don't even have that kind of a background are now looking at that in terms of figuring out how their mind works. And have you always been fascinated with the way the mind works?
Yes, not only the mind, but the brain, the relationship between the mind and the brain. For one of my wife's birthdays, I got her a phrenology head. That is a plaster head made by a phrenologist in the 19th century, which located the parts of the brain that are for emotion and for memory and for all that. And the phrenology, of course, was completely wrong. But it was onto something, and that is the relationship between the structure of the brain and the mind. The mind is the product of the brain, but the brain is the physiology without which you could not have a mind.
I became fascinated with Einstein, and I started studying him a little bit more, and even just what was discovered after he passed in terms of his brain and what sections were bigger, and assumably why he had a bigger capacity for certain things. But yeah, you're right. It's when you start digging into it, very fascinating. The brain.
Well, we have that in common. I'm a big fan of Einstein, and I've gotten for all of my children and grandchildren handwritten letters by Einstein.
Wonderful.
Some of them containing formulas. I just sent my daughter and son-in-law an Einstein statement or photograph, which has in his hand E=mc², and a couple of other formulas. And I also have his letter to the scientists after the Second World War, urging America not to ever use atomic weapons again. And so my wall is filled with Einstein memorabilia. He's one of my great heroes.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. When you start studying his life, and honestly, Alan, I'm getting chills from what you just said in terms of having those actual pieces written by him. There was a quote given by Elie Wiesel, and this is what he said, and I'm going to read it. It pertains obviously to you. If there had been a few people like Alan Dershowitz during the 1930s and 40s, the history of European Jewry might have been different. And that was when an award was presented to you. Hearing that from that gentleman, how does that make you feel?
Well, I think about it every day. He really set a very, very high standard for me. I don't think it's true. I don't think I could have stopped what Hitler was doing. But what I see Iran trying to do today to the world, already they've captured Lebanon and the Gaza Strip and Yemen and Iraq, and they're trying to capture the rest of the world. I see symptoms that are close to the symptoms of what happened in the 1930s in Germany. And so I see my role as what Elie Wiesel said. I'm trying my best to stop and make sure that nothing like that ever happens again, not only to the Jewish people, but to any people. There is real genocide going on in the world today. It goes on in China. It goes on in parts of Africa and the Sudan. And there are efforts to expose the Jewish population of Israel to genocide. October 7th was an attempt at that. It killed 1,200 people, but it would have killed more if they had the chance to do so. And so I see as an important part of my role to trying to prevent that by all costs.
It's painful to know that this still goes on in our society today. Forget about religion, forget about politics and all of that. And I did a podcast last week with a music therapist who worked with children and families following the October 7th attack. And I honestly wanted to cry after hearing how those children described the terror and how she, using music, helped them bounce back and help them feel comfortable. I never knew it existed.
That's wonderful. I went and visited the site of the horrors in southern Israel shortly after it occurred. I was invited by the Prime Minister of Israel to go there and to look at what happened and to meet with the families of people, and I did. And it made me cry, too. And it can never happen again. And, of course, Hamas has pledged it will happen again, and they will try to do it unless they are destroyed. You know, terrorists have no legitimate place in the world today, and Iran is the biggest exporter of terrorism. They've exported it to Lebanon, to the Gaza Strip, to Iraq, and to Yemen, and now they're trying to bring it to the Sudan, and they have to be stopped. They are the today's version of Germany in the early 1930s, when Germany could have been stopped but wasn't stopped. And if Iran develops a nuclear weapon, everything will change. And so I hope that is not permitted to happen.
It's heartbreaking. It truly is. I want to lighten things for a moment here, along with everything that you have done. I hear you've been the subject of 2 New Yorker cartoons on my radar because when I was younger, I wanted to be a syndicated cartoonist, so I would watch everything. Times crossword puzzle, a Trivial Pursuit question. Do you recall what that question was?
I don't, but, my daughter has now become a crossword puzzle maker. She has made crossword puzzles for the New York Times, for the Wall Street Journal, for the Atlantic, for a range of other prominent media. The Trivial Pursuit question may have been about
one of the cases.
Reversal of Fortune, the movie, made based on my defense of Klaus von Bülow.
Okay.
I think so. The crossword puzzle was based on a book I wrote called Chutzpah, and it was an acrostic, and it was a quotation from the book. And my name has appeared a number of times in crossword puzzles, lawyer who defended so-and-so, and you have to fill in my name. So, yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind when I hear Times crossword puzzle, and you mentioned that your daughter writes those, after midnight. After midnight. You know what that means?
No.
My girlfriend is fixated with those puzzles, and they change at midnight.
Yeah, well, I'll have to ask my daughter about that.
So she knows. She
knows. Them. I can't solve any of her puzzles, and it's really an indication when a father can't even solve his own daughter's crossword puzzles. It shows how much smarter she is than I am. I've been fortunate to produce much smarter offspring than me. I've had grandkids graduate from medical school, kids graduate from law school, and so I'm very, very proud father and very proud grandfather. That's the proudest thing that I've accomplished, to have a good, solid family, and I really, appreciate the good luck that's involved in that, too.
I love the fact that you express gratitude in many ways, and, congratulations on your kids and grandkids. I have one final question, and I'm still trying to piece this together here. Named, in your honor, a sandwich At a ballpark. Pastrami, I might add. Fenway Park. Now, you're a New Yorker. Fenway Park, what's going on?
Well, I lived in Boston for 50 years, and I became a fanatical Red Sox fan, and I became a friend of the owner of the Red Sox, and he used to seat me in the box next to him and take me on trips with him. And then when I defended Donald Trump, he cut me off completely, and he said, no, I had no longer had any rights to have special treatment at Fenway Park, but I still root for the Red Sox.
Well, I was just going to ask you, New York, Yankees, I guess we'll...
I like the Yankees, too, but, I grew up as a Brooklyn Dodger fan, so I hated the Yankees because the Yankees beat the Brooklyn Dodgers every year. I think, between the time I was like 10 years old and 15, the Yankees won 3 or 4 World Series, and then finally in 1955, the Brooklyn Dodgers beat the Yankees, and I own the ring that was worn by Don Zimmer for the 1955 World Championship. And it's a proud possession. It's not as important to me as Thomas Jefferson's letter, but it's pretty important to my memories of my youth.
In closing here today, and I want to share the word peace. Now, I used to hear that word thrown around all the time, being younger, peace, sign, everybody say, peace be with you, all of that. I never realized what it meant until I realized at that time there was no true peace in my life. And when you find it, it's a game changer. The word peace. Now, I know it resonates with you with everything that you've done. And how do you describe peace?
Well, it has so many meanings. The Hebrew word for peace is shalom, which means hello, it means goodbye, it means peace, it means peace of mind. And the word peace is multifaceted. There's external peace, which we all want, no wars. But peace is a way in which we approach life and look at life, and having peace of mind, being able to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and say, I'm a good person. I've lived by my principles. That's the kind of peace that I wish for everybody.
Alan, it has been a pleasure, and I'm going to say an honor talking with you. So, what a career.
Likewise.
What you have done, just amazing. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Alan Dershowitz on the program. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.